YouTube, Dawson Ryder here. Welcome to my review for Power Rangers issue 16, and this is the Power Rangers side of things finale of the Eltarian War arc, and effectively, as predicted, an epilogue type story, kind of like I talked about in Mighty Morphin 16. I do like that we have an epilogue issue because one of my favorite things about the Power Rangers comic is it's not just all the bright colors and explosions and shouting, it actually has character and story to it, and I like that we get kind of some moments on the character beats at the end. We pick up right where we left off with the stuff with Zed and Zordon kind of being in peril, and they kind of have this philosophical discussion, for lack of a better word, about like, you know, do you really believe in the will of the morphing grid? And he's like, you know, kind of like the whole, like, do you believe in the Force, do you believe in God type of situation, and Zed's just like, how can you believe in the grid? It's just a knockoff of the Force, stop trying to be Star Wars, you'll never be Star Wars. And then Zordon's like, well, I've always been more of a Trek fan, and he's like, get the hell off of our land. Get the hell out of here. He takes him to Alpha, and then they go to safety. No, but basically, you know, it's kind of a philosophical conversation about that, touching a bit on their history, showing that there's maybe a little bit of Zofram and Zed, just highlighting that he's actually more of a multi-dimensional character than he is compared to the one-note version in the show. But he takes Zordon to where Alpha can bring him back to safety, and Zordon's, you know, kind of failing in the suit, and he needs to get back into basically a tube, you know, in case anyone was wondering if this was going to be a permanent status quo. And just in case it doesn't work out, he said, there's one thing I always wanted to do before I go back in the tube, and that's, I guess, pilot a Zord, because he's on, like, the Mega Tiger Dragon Zord thing. But then he gets put in a temporary Zordon tube in this temporary base that Grace has since the Prometheus destroyed. You know, on the one hand, I knew that was going to happen, and I don't necessarily know if I'd always want Zordon in this form, especially since I know he might be taken off the table for the next arc. But that being said, I think it actually would have been kind of interesting to have Zordon have a mobile form for a while, just maybe for a little bit into the next arc. We'll kind of see how things play out in the future, but I was a little bit disappointed by that. But you have that all settled. Then you also have the villains who helped them, you know, Goldar Company being thanked by the Rangers for their help, and they basically offer him a choice and say, you know, you can go to a new life or you can go back to Zed. And they wind up going back to Zed, of course, because we have to have more storylines, and there's no other villains except the MMPR ones. But it's interesting because they say that the reason they did it, or at least, you know, that's what Babu says for the group, is because they didn't want to disappoint Rita, which I think is interesting only because to me it hints that Rita might be coming back soon. You know, if we do delve into Season 3 stuff and onward, we're getting to the period of time where Zed and Rita got married. So I'm definitely interested to see their version of events on that, whether or not they get married, just seeing Rita back into play. I know we've gotten a lot of focus on Rita, but since we've gotten some backstory on Zed now and kind of had his time to shine, we're kind of entering the era where it's both of them, so I'm interested to see if that means anything in regards to that. Also get a nice little closure reunition scene between Skull and Candace, which, you know, I was never overly invested in that, but I at least was glad that they addressed that. Something I did want when I was talking about the Mighty Morphin finale was I wanted them to address a little bit of the connection with, like, Drakkon and Trini and stuff, and they do have a nice scene where they talk on comms, because I felt there was a lot of build-up in the dynamic of Drakkon and Trini, and then a little bit in Drakkon and Jason I thought there was going to be more payoff for, and I think clearly they might be saving that for the long run, but I did like that they touched on that a little bit. And she says, you know, you don't have to be the way that you were, Tommy. And I'm like, dude, I told you I don't want Drakkon redeemed. The Tommy redemption story is Tommy. We don't need that for this. But I liked it, and I still think it's going to set Drakkon up to be kind of right where I want him, where it still is a villain, but he might be helpful on occasion and has, like, a little bit of gray area humanity. Just a smidge. Like, think of, like, Alice from Batwoman, sort of. Except I think I like Alice better. Regardless, that's kind of exactly where I want him. I think they might be setting him up to be kind of more of a recurring character in the Omega Rangers story, which I wouldn't necessarily be mad at. I just hope they don't overuse it. But nonetheless, I'm just glad that they addressed that little connection there. It was a nice little character beat. And it made sense they waited to do it here just because it was more of a feature of Power Rangers and it really wasn't touched on in Mighty Morphin, obviously, because the characters weren't there. They also have a scene where the Blue Emissary is leaving the Omega Rangers to their own devices, basically, because he's like, you know, I was resurrected. I don't know how much time I have, but you guys are basically good on your own now. Which I think is interesting. I don't think they're going to take out the Blue Emissary anytime soon since he's the last one left. But if we touch on that character later, I'm definitely interested to see what happens with him. Both in terms of the story going on now and like the future of that whole mythology with the Emissaries and the Morphin Masters and all that. I'm also very interested to see where the Omega Rangers get next, which I'll get into in a second because like at the end of the review, of the proper review of this comic, I'm going to talk about kind of my hopes for the future and my thoughts on the future. Then we just kind of end off with Zed having asked his villains, like, did you do the thing I asked you to do before you left? And they said yes. I'm going to presume it was like planted a bomb in the command center or something, and he's like, okay, we're going to take off now because there's about to be a lot of chaos. And he takes off his helmet. I don't know if that was just kind of symbolic for the arc or if we might get a new look for Zed in season season 3, you know what I mean? But I don't know, it was a good place to end it off on. And overall, I thought it was a solid issue. I kind of feel the same about this one as I did of Mighty Morphin, in the sense that I feel it was a very solid conclusion with lots of good moments. There wasn't a ton of surprises or anything that really shocked me, but I thought it was a solid arc, and I appreciated getting an epilogue issue to sort of touch on the character stuff, especially in regards to stuff like Trini and Drakkon. So I would overall give it a 4 out of 5. I thought it was a solid epilogue-y conclusion. Doesn't really give us a whole lot of hints towards the future necessarily outside of the Zed thing compared to when the last arc ended with Drakkon landing, but we'll see. But now I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about what I'd like to see and some of my thoughts on after this. I've said this on numerous occasions in the comic reviews, but I'm not saying I want them to be a main focus, but going into the next arc or arcs, I really would like to see a little bit more attention paid to the characters of Rocky, Adam, and Aisha, because one of my favorite things about the comic, in addition to the storytelling and lore, that really gripped me from the beginning, before even the Drakkon and Shattered Grid stuff, was the time and attention paid to developing these characters, getting to meet versions of the MMPR characters that are actual characters, and not one-dimensional charity volunteers. That was one of the best things about it for me, and I feel that with everything going on with Shattered Grid and the Omegas and like the Morphin Mutants and now the Eltarians and Zed, New Green Ranger, Rocky, Adam, and Aisha have really just fell by the wayside. They've touched on them every now and then. There was a couple little tidbits about the team having a hard time working together during the Necessary Evil arc, but that kind of was more about Jason, Zach, and Trini leaving. And I really would like to see those characters get the treatment that all the other MMPR characters are being given, not only now, but in the past, because before this arc, I think they got some good treatment in regards to character development before all the major world stuff started coming in. But even within this arc, I feel like everyone's kind of got their distinct place, and I really would like to see them get a little more to do. Speaking of a little bit more to do, I want to see a little bit more attention also paid to the Green Ranger, which might sound funny, but I think they made a huge deal about introducing a new Green Ranger, and I really did like the debut arc for him, but I feel like after the Under the Dome arc, he kind of also fell by the wayside, and I feel like they made such a significant deal about bringing back the Green Ranger and bringing in a new Green Ranger period. I feel they need to do a little bit more with him and something more interesting. I'm not saying Matt's my favorite, but I don't mind him, and I think there's interesting directions to go, and like I said, I enjoyed his debut arc. I think a lot of people gave him too much heat. It was one of those times where I'm like, I don't know what the fandom wants sometimes, because they're like, I don't want it to be another Tommy variant. I'm like, okay, it's not Tommy. No, it should be Tommy! It's like, what do you guys want? Matt wasn't my first choice, but I think that there's potential with him, and I just want to see more done with him because I want it to come off as more than just a stunt. Also, in regards to the Omegas, I think that the Omegas are one of my favorite things about this era of the comic, and I certainly want to see that continue, but I'm very interested to see where they go from here, both in the next arc and going forward after that, just because it feels like right now they don't have a call to action, and there's an interesting place they're in, because, in the show, they left because of the peace conference, and then in the comic universe, in the previous timeline, Zach and Trini kind of were fine hanging up the helmets after that, and I feel like they've hinted at that before, but then obviously we know Jason, in many timelines, is looped to becoming a Ranger again. And before, the Omegas have had calls to action. Obviously their first call to action was the Shattered Grid Aftermath, and then the Imperials. But right now, there's no pressing threat other than that they would patrol space as the Omegas to save people and aliens and all that type of stuff. So I'm really curious to see how their arc moves forward in regards to their development and sort of merging together the new versions of their characters in this post-Shattered Grid world and what their characters were in other universes, pre-Shattered Grid here and also like the TV show versions. But I'm interested to see that. But what did you guys think of the finale of this arc? What do you want to see from the future? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe, climb the steps, and ring that bell. See notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.